What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This one should be more low-key. I'm just going to be going through my first mock auction draft this offseason. I'll be doing a 12-team PPR auction mock draft. Pretty standard roster, one quarterback, two running backs, two receivers, tight end, and a flex with 7 bench spots. So, yeah, I just thought I'd hop in and do one. Figured I might as well record it and let you guys see it if you want to take a look. So, yeah, I'll just sort of talk through what I'm thinking as we go through this, and we'll sort of see how it goes. I make no promises that the team ends up being very good because this is my first auction draft so far, but I've just recently finished up doing my rankings and projections, so that should help sort of establish which guys I think are great values. So I do have Justin Jefferson being pretty clearly the wide receiver one this season. I think Tyreek Hill is actually my wide receiver two. So as much as I do love him, though, I think that there's some receivers that I have pretty close to him, and he's just not going to be worth overpaying for. So I'm going to sit on the sidelines for this one. It's just tough to spend $75, $200 on one player. So I'll wait on the sidelines here a little bit and sort of hang in there waiting for value. McCaffrey, I do have as my wide receiver three, actually. I've got Eckler and Saquon ahead of him in my projections. I personally don't think that with those projections I would take him that way. I'd probably go McCaffrey and then Eckler. So projections I might need to look at there a little bit, but I do like Eckler quite a bit. I think that there's no reason to believe he won't be the same as he was last year, so maybe it's fair to have Eckler as that running back one, but we'll see how my rankings end up panning out after I sort of filter through those more. I have mentioned it in another video, but my rankings and projections will be up on my website here pretty soon. Should be available to you guys free of charge. Obviously, not going to make you guys pay for those, so just want to be here to help you out as much as possible. Cooper Kupp's a guy I'm also super excited about. I don't think it takes much explaining. He's been a top wide receiver when healthy the last couple of years. There's no reason to expect him to be any worse. He does come with some built-in risk, just given that there is the opportunity of Matthew Stafford to get hurt, and he is coming off an injury. I'm not really worried about Cooper Kupp's injury himself, but I think I am a little bit worried about Stafford's injury and really just the state of the Rams as a whole. So if I'm going to spend up on a wide receiver, I just don't see myself ending up with too much Cooper Kupp just because I think I can get guys that are just as good, like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, and really avoid a lot of that risk that comes with Cooper Kupp. One thing I'll note here as well is I think this ends up happening quite a bit is that you'll see that the players, especially early on, go for a little bit more expensive than what you see as your pre-draft value. I'll be doing a deep dive into what I view some auction draft strategies as well. I think you guys end up loving that. But something that I found to be really helpful is these platforms really often have very different pre-draft values, and I think that's something that you can really abuse. So what I end up doing is I end up making it's like a regression model that will look at average ADP across all these websites, and then it will compile how much these players should cost come your draft. So this will be our first time nominating a player. I generally like to nominate players that I don't see myself drafting just because I want my opponents to spend money and not have money to bid on guys that I'm interested in. So Derrick Henry is a guy, I think I have him as my running back 7, but there's just too much risk associated with him. I tend to take the approach in the first round that I want as little risk as possible with the player I'm drafting just because you can't really win your draft with your first round pick. I mean, even if your pick hits, you're just basically where you should be. But you can absolutely lose your league on your first round pick. If you drafted Jonathan Taylor last season, you were screwed. So it's just the kind of guy that anyone with that high of a risk profile, it's just somebody that I'm avoiding. But yeah, like I was saying with that model, I'll be doing a video on in a bit. What I like to do is I like to see how much you should expect to pay for a player based off of their average draft position, and then you can compare that to where they land on all these different sites. And it ends up being a really good way to see what the best values are on your specific platform because it's definitely something that needs to be taken advantage of. ADPs and auction values, especially, are widely varied from platform to platform, so it's really important to note that you should take advantage of those because especially the people that you're drafting with, they're going to have very different. Um, they're often going to base their assumptions on these players really heavily off of what the pre-draft value says there. No matter how much research you do, it's just really hard to not fall in love with that number right there and think that that's how much you should expect to play for a player. So it's something that's really hard to get out of the headspace of, and especially people that you're in a league with that maybe aren't preparing as much as you are. It's going to be something that they get super excited about, and it's something that you just have to keep in mind. So Tyreek Hill, this is the first player that I have as a pretty good value on my projections. I'm willing to pay up to about 30% of my auction salary cap here. I don't want to overpay for a player. I just have a hard time getting convincing myself to overpay for players too much early here. There's still so many good players on the board that I love that I just don't want to put myself in a hole early. Jonathan Taylor is actually a guy that I was a little bit surprised about when I did my projections. I've got him listed as my running back 13. Um, I know that feels really low for a guy that we've seen be the running back one by a mile just 2 years ago, but I'm worried that the Colts offense as a whole is going to be really bad. And then on top of that, I think that there's just a really good opportunity for Anthony Richardson to steal goal line work from him. So I'd expect to see there to be less touchdown opportunity on this Colts offense. Anthony Richardson's going to steal plenty of touchdowns from the goal line because of how well athletic he is. And then there's certainly going to be a possibility for Anthony Richardson to not really throw the ball to running backs very much. We often see that these mobile quarterbacks don't do that a whole lot. And that makes it hard because when you're as talented as Jonathan Taylor is, it doesn't really matter too much how good you are if you're not getting high touchdown numbers or high receiving volume for that high of a draft pick. So I sort of have him profiling to be more of a Nick Chubb this season, where he maybe rushes for 1,500 yards, but the offense isn't fantastic. He's just not going to catch enough passes. So I think Jonathan Taylor is still going to be like a low end running back one. I still love the player, but I just can't see myself taking very much of him this season. Devontae Adams, another guy, I have him ranked as my wide receiver 4. He's obviously an elite player, but there's just, again, too much risk around that offense. There's obviously concerns that Jimmy Garoppolo might not be there come the start of the season with his injury. And there's just, I mean, Devontae Adams is getting up there in age. He's plenty young to still be elite, but I don't see myself drafting too much of him just because I think that there are guys that are just as good that you can get for a little bit cheaper and with less risk. I was really thinking about bidding on Stephon Diggs there. He's certainly somebody that I do love quite a bit, but I just couldn't get myself to pull the trigger. There's just a couple of guys that are later on in this draft that I have much higher grades on than I do on. There's much greater value on some of these guys that you end up finding in the rounds 3 and 4. So it's really hard for me to pull the trigger on some of these guys early, just because I think that I can get a lot more value late, and I like to sort of save my money there. I found often something that I'll do is just try and get maybe one or two studs, and there's a lot of middle ground guys that I just absolutely love. So somebody that I actually have found myself drafting a ton of is Josh Allen. He's kind of been my splurge just because I think that it's really hard to win this season without having a top 3 quarterback, and we saw that last season. They're obviously going a lot higher than they did previously, but I've always found that just from a ADP to auction cost standpoint, the quarterbacks actually end up being pretty good values just because they think the quarterback should cost less, but these guys are going in the late second round and you're getting them for 35, $40, and it's definitely something that I like taking a look at. Josh Jacobs is another guy I like a lot. I think he's going to be around a top 5 running back again this season, but I just haven't found myself drafting too much of him just because I don't see the value being there. Same thing with Jalen Waddle. I think he's a really great player. Love the talent, but I think that in general, I think he's just a little bit too pricey for me. He and Higgins and Devonta Smith sort of are all the same 3 things there. I think that I actually think T. Higgins is about as good as him this season. I think they're back-to-back in my projections this season, and you can get T. Higgins for much cheaper, so I don't find myself drafting Waddle very much. So now we're getting to the point where we're getting pretty late in this draft, and I don't have anybody on my team yet. So in an attempt to try and guarantee that I get somebody that I want, I'm going to nominate Nick Chubb right now. We're running out of running backs that I love, and if I miss out on Nick Chubb, then I really want to sort of solidify myself. I'm going to get Najee Harris probably if I can't get Chubb. So I'm going to nominate Chubb here, and I'm going to do my best to actually get him. I'm not going to overpay too much, but I'm willing to overpay a little bit. Nick Chubb is my running back 7 in my projections, despite ADP of like running back 12, I believe. So he'll likely be a guy that I touch on in my best running back values as well. I find myself getting a ton of him. It's just there's such a huge opportunity for Nick Chubb in this Browns offense. He's obviously just an extremely talented player. There's no reason to believe that he's not going to have 1,300 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns again this season. And there's even more upside than that because this Browns offense could certainly be much better than it was last season, especially if Deshaun Watson comes back to form. And on top of that, there's no Kareem Hunt, so there's certainly a possibility for Nick Chubb to catch a lot of passes this season. And if that can happen, then Nick Chubb's going to be an absolute steal in drafts. And he's honestly been really durable throughout his career, too. I'm not too worried about him. He's plenty young. And I just think Nick Chubb could end up being one of the steals of the draft. I think he's got a real shot. I mean, if you told me Nick Chubb finishes a running back 1 this season, I don't think I'd be too shocked. So I love Nick Chubb, and I find myself getting a ton of him this season. Garrett Wilson's a guy I love the player, but I can't find myself paying this much for him. I think that I would personally rather have a guy like Chris Olave. I think Chris Olave is honestly a better player. Maybe that's a hot take, but I think that it's going to be an offense that's going to need to score more as well. I think the Jets are going to really spread the ball around more than people expect. There's just a lot of receivers in this Jets offense. Rodgers is obviously going to have a rapport with Allen Lazard. Randall Cobb's probably going to see the field because Rodgers loves him. And they've got guys like Corey Davis, McCole Hardman. I think that Garrett Wilson will still be like a top 15 wide receiver, but I just don't see that top 5, top 10 upside that a lot of people are super excited for. Pollard's another guy I have ranked above consensus ADP, but I don't find myself spending it up on 2 running backs very often here. It's hard to build a team after you spend 40% of your money on 2 players, especially at the same position. So I find myself really avoiding these guys here. I think there's a lot of values that you can get, especially later on in drafts, running back positions. So what I think in general my strategy here is going to be is it's going to be to get one of the really good quarterbacks and then sort of just fill my starting lineup as much as possible, and then you can spend $1 on each of your bench players because that's how you end up saving the most money for making the best starting lineup. And often, I do this all the time where I will try to remind myself how sort of much we overthink valuing our bench and our drafts during the off season. So something I recommend you do is just go take a look at one of the teams you drafted last season, take a look at the bench that you made, and then look and see how many of those guys ended up on your roster at the end of the season. I bet it's 1, maybe 2. A lot of these guys end up being guys that you drop a couple weeks into the year, and I think that it's something that people really overthink. They really try and value getting depth, and that's certainly something that's worth having. But just with how few guarantees there are out there, I don't want to stress the word guarantee too much because there's obviously no guarantees here. We're doing a lot of projecting, but it's tough to sink real capital into what you want as a bench player because there's just a good to fair chance that those guys that you draft for your bench aren't going to be there anyway. Another thing I'll note when you're doing these auction drafts is something you'll see often. It's a little bit different with the computer here, but players that go at the end of a tier often end up being the most expensive one because, so for example, say you really wanted to get a tier 1 quarterback, and I think everyone's consensus tier 1 quarterbacks are going to be Mahomes, Hurts, and Josh Allen. So if you really wanted to get one of those 3 and the first 2 are gone, what you'll often see is that last one goes for far more expensive than the other 2 because people realize that it's their last shot to get one. You'll find yourself in a bidding war. So I tend to like to be a little bit more aggressive on that second to last player in a tier. So as someone who, especially for this build, I want to try out getting one of these top 3 quarterbacks, you're going to see me be pretty aggressive on whichever one of these next 2 guys gets nominated, Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, just because I don't want to find myself backed into a corner, especially where I've been pretty patient going into this draft so far. I'm sort of letting things come to me, and I only have 1 player so far, and we're on pick 27 right now. So if I pass up on Josh Allen and then Jalen Hurts gets bid up too much, then I'm sitting there with too much money and just not really knowing what to do with it. And that's how you find yourself really overpaying for players, and you don't want to do that. So I will probably be getting Josh Allen after he gets nominated here, and that's going to be a really solid start to my draft, having Josh Allen and Nick Chubb going into my team building, or Jalen Hurts. So, yep, Jalen Hurts is nominated here, so I'm going to make sure that I get him if I can. If he gets crazy out of hand, I will back out, but I'm willing to go up to about 37 here. Um, so yeah, I'll do 35. All right, 37. I said I'd stop there. So if I can't get him for more than that, then I'm going to have to just make sure I get Josh Allen here. But I don't really have them too different. I actually do have Jalen Hurts projected as my quarterback 1. I think that that's a pretty reasonable projection given how great he was last season and how much he offers on the round. But um, any of those top 3 I think are pretty interchangeable, and I love them. So certainly would be guys that I'm all in on getting. And I think that it really solidifies your team as well. I've got 2 real guarantees here in Jalen Hurts and Nick Chubb. I know I spent up a ton on getting Jalen Hurts, and that's something that uh, generally, as a consensus as a fantasy community, we don't recommend that you spend up on that quarterback position. But I think last year really showed us that there are a couple quarterbacks that are just true difference makers, and if you don't have one of those guys, it ends up being really difficult to compete when you're putting out a streaming level quarterback. You're getting nice, you got 20 points out of your quarterback, but then you're opponent's Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts drops 40 on you, and no matter how well your team performs outside of that, it makes it really hard to win. So having that sort of advantage at the quarterback position, I think, is super important, especially given that there are three of them now. It used to be like, okay, maybe there's one quarterback who laps the field, and that makes it less of an issue when you don't have one because you're only playing somebody that's got that advantage once or twice a season, so it's not as big of a deal. But when there are three quarterbacks out there that can just really kill you, it feels bad not having one. And given that I missed out on Travis Kelce, so I don't have that positional advantage at the tight end position, I feel like I really want to make sure I have that at the quarterback. So something that I think I'm going to be really making a big point of this season is making sure that I get a top tier quarterback or a top tier tight end. A lot of people really fall in love with getting both, and I think that's going to be a little bit too difficult. It's just hard to build a team when you spend that much money on two positions that don't fill your the majority of your starting lineup. I will say that if you want to go with that approach, it makes more sense to do it in a league like this, where there's a quarterback and a tight end, and only two running backs and two wide receivers, and a flex, obviously. If you play in a league that allows you to start three wide receivers or even four or something bigger like that, then it's really hard to spend that much money on the tight end and quarterback position because it that money goes really fast, and any advantage you have at the tight end position can be made up for pretty quickly if players get to start three receivers that are better than you or three. So I find that getting that tight end position and quarterback advantage is more advantageous the smaller your starting roster is, and um, so if you really want to go all in on getting a top tier quarterback and a top tier tight end, make sure you do it in a team that's only allows you to start two wide receivers in a flex. Don't wait for a team that's bigger than that because it's going to be really difficult. So yeah, like I said, Mark Andrews is a guy that I do have projected to be really great. I have him as a pretty steep drop behind Travis Kelce. I think he's like 3 points per game worse. I don't find myself getting too much Mark Andrews, and my tight end 3 actually in my rankings is currently Dallas Goedert. I've got him projected for over 1,000 receiving yards. I think he's just a really good player, and that's a player that I might target later on in this draft because I have Jalen Hurts. This obviously isn't a best ball draft, so I'm less concerned with making sure that I get a stack, but it does feel really good having a stack at the quarterback and tight end position that you love, and I don't think I'd have to pay too much for it. I think Dallas Goedert's going to be somewhere around like $6. $6, yeah. So he's consensus tight end 6 here, and I've got him as my tight end 3, so he's a pretty big value, and getting a value on a player that I also will feel really great and give me a lot of upside on a week-to-week basis makes me super excited. Devonta Smith's another guy I like quite a bit, but I'm actually kind of holding off right now at the wide receiver position. My pretty much number one value, a guy that I've been finding myself drafting over and over and over again in best ball, is Chris Olave. I've got him listed as my wide receiver 8 despite an ADP of wide receiver 13, and I honestly think wide receiver 8 is just it's probably too careful. I think he could be even better than that. He's just a super explosive player. They got a huge upgrade at the quarterback position, getting Derek Carr this offseason. I'm not worried about Michael Thomas. I think Chris Olave is going to be an absolute monster this season, and him being $22 when you're out here paying guy like 44 for Jalen Waddle, or I mean Deebo Samuel costing $26 when you can get Chris Olave for 22 is just silly. So Olave is a guy that I'm leaving pretty much every draft I can with. We're really getting into that spot where there's a lot of guys that I really like around here. Ken Walker is a guy that I've been a little sad about. I have him in a keeper league where I'm going to get to keep him as like a last round pick, so I love that. But at the same time, them drafting Charbonnet has me kind of down on his prospects this season. I think he's a really good player, but I've got him projected as my running back 23, and that's just because I see him losing that receiving down work to Charbonnet, and it's just going to be hard for him to be a super elite fantasy producer when he's not getting receiving work, and he's probably going to split some of those rushing touchdowns. So Olave is a guy I'm super excited about. Like I touched on, he's going to be a guy that I'm pretty much drafting as much as I can at these prices. I'd be willing to pay up to 30 for him. That's a really gross overpay, and I'd just be happy doing it because of how much I think he's going to overperform expectations this season. So there's some guys that I love getting. So when I do put out my model that shows how much I think you should be paying for players, I'll make sure to include guys that I think are best values. I think Olave is definitely going to be one. I think I'll probably have him projected to be like a $40 player, and getting him for 24 is just a massive steal to me. So if we take a look around here, we've got $98 left, which feels not bad at all. There are only 3 teams with more money left than me, so I feel like we're in a pretty good spot, and we've really got some anchors down at each position. We've got a top-tier quarterback, a top-tier running back, and a top-tier receiver, so super excited about that, and I think there's just a lot of values left to be had here. Brees Hall is a guy I love, but I think that he's going to have a really slow start to the season. The Jets have just an absolutely brutal first like 8, 9 weeks, and on top of that, he's going to be coming off an injury that really it's hard for players to perform super well right when they come back from their injury. So I'd expect him to be a guy that gets better and better from a talent perspective and just an opposition perspective as the season goes on. So maybe I think Brees Hall is going to be one of those players that I don't draft a whole lot of, but he's probably a guy that I'll be looking to trade for mid-season. So there are a couple other guys that I really love here as values. Another one of my number two value at the running back position, I believe, is going to be David Montgomery. I have him projected as like a top 15 running back. I actually have him one spot behind Jahmyr Gibbs. The Lions' offense is just one that got a ton of work last season. They were far and away the best running back room from a fantasy standpoint if you combine the points produced by that position. And honestly, it got better than it did last season. Jahmyr Gibbs is a better player than DeAndre Swift. You can just look at draft capital; it makes sense. And David Montgomery is a much better player than Jamal Williams. He's a better runner. He's more explosive, and he's a better pass catcher. So I think David Montgomery's honestly got a shot to be like a low-end running back one this season. He and Gibbs could both find their way into that top 12, and getting him for look $12, I spent 6% of my budget on a player that I think is going to be a top 15 running back. That's just an absolute steal. I'm going to be getting a ton of David Montgomery at those prices, and I'd be shocked if it doesn't return value there. So I recommend you get those guys as well. I love the value you're getting there, and I just don't think it's going to be something that could bite you. Kamara's a guy I've been avoiding quite a bit. I think he's going to get suspended for 6 games. He's getting old. He wasn't really great last season, and they brought Jamal Williams in. They drafted Kendre Miller. I think Alvin Kamara's probably on his way out the door, and I don't really want any part of him this season. Obviously, having Jalen Hurts, there's no reason for us to even consider drafting a quarterback, especially having to pay more than $1 for one right now, so no reason to look at that. But getting Joe Burrow for $17 is a pretty good value, especially compared to the 37 for Hurts. I don't regret spending 37 on Hurts because I think he is that much better than Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow and Herbert are going to be really similar, I think, every single year, where you're sort of just hoping for a 40 touchdown season. If they have a negative regression to the mean of the touchdown standpoint, you'll be a little disappointed. So I'm actually a little bit down on Burrow this season. I think I got him as my quarterback 6, which is by no means bad, but I just think that I'd rather have Herbert at the value you can get him. So I don't find myself drafting too much Burrow this season. So looking around here, we still only have one receiver. There's a couple running backs that I still love on the board. I am super high on Miles Sanders and James Conner. Um, I'd like to get at least one of them. I tend to lean towards Miles Sanders. I think he's a better player on a better offense, and he's cheaper. So I'll be looking to get Miles Sanders here, but I'm interested in James Conner as well. James Conner's just got that whole running back room to himself, so it's hard to really look the other way just because I think he's still a good player, and anytime you get that much of a market share at the position, you're going to be good. So Conner's a guy worth looking at. At the receiver position, it gets a little hairy here. There's just not a whole lot of really top tier talent left, but there's quite a few values we've got left. I touched on Tyler Lockett and Marquise Brown as guys that I have as really good values, and I've also been really surprised by how high I have Brandon Ayuk ranked, so I think I'm going to find myself drafting or making an effort to draft all 3 of those guys. I will point out that's something that I tend to just really love about auction is that I don't really have to worry so much about ADP. I can just have, all right, these are guys that I think are crazy values, and I want them, so I'm going to get them. And then as long as prices don't get too out of hand, I'm going to sort of take a look at all of these guys. Pretty much everyone left in this draft has very little money. There's 3 other teams that can really bid me up on players. If you look at Team 12, he's got 2 wide receivers, so I doubt he's really going to be interested in stealing any. Team 6 needs wide receivers, but just honestly less money than me. James Conner for 15 is something I'm interested in. Team 10 still needs to get a quarterback, no receivers, so Team 10 is going to be interested in as well. They're probably going to compete with me for those wide receivers, but getting James Conner for 15 here, I feel really good. I feel like I'm done at my running back position until things get quieter towards the end of the draft. So if I leave a draft with Nick Chubb, David Montgomery, and James Conner, I'm going to feel really good about my running back room. I feel like I have 3 top 15 running backs there, and I don't think that these are guys that are getting enough respect. So I love that running back room, and I feel really comfortable leaving my draft with that. And I'll probably get some $1 guys later on that make me really happy. Every year I do find that this middle rounds, we're looking at pick 50 right now, so we're effectively in like the early 5th round. I find that this is where I see some of the best values in the drafts where you've got guys that are $6, $7 that I think are still really valuable, and it's worth saving that little extra money for these middle round picks because once you get into those $1 guys, there's not a lot, and they don't cost. It doesn't cost that much more to get Brandon Ayuk than it does to get Odell Beckham Jr. And that $5 difference is going to be the difference between a player that you can keep all season and a player that you're probably dropping after a couple weeks. So I like saving a little bit of money for these middle rounds. It actually sort of makes these drafts go by pretty quick too because you'll see that pretty soon here my team is probably going to look a lot fuller than it does right now because I'm going to make an effort to get Lockett, Marquise Brown, and Ayuk, and then suddenly I'm going to have my bench starting to get filled out, and I will have just be in need of a quarterback or a tight end and then a couple more bench pieces. Hawkinson's the guy I am interested in. I've got him listed as my tight end 4. I think that he's just going to be the number 3 target in that offense. He's a really good player, but I think Addison is just too good, and I have him just a little bit below consensus ADP, so he's not a guy that I'm going to be willing to overpay for very often. So yeah, I'm happy to let him go. I have him in a couple best ball teams just because I've tried to stack him with Kirk Cousins, who I think is going to be really good. But so I'm going to nominate Marquise Brown here. Marquise Brown's going to be the clear wide receiver 1 for the Cardinals in offense that I think is going to be at least a little bit better than people are projecting. Colt McCoy is reasonably talented as a backup quarterback, and there's obviously Kyler Murray is going to come back at some point and make that offense a lot better. So Marquise Brown was the wide receiver 5 in the first 6 weeks of last season without DeAndre Hopkins. This is going to be a Cardinals defense that's just really bad. So the only way the Cardinals could be competitive in games is if they can keep up on offense. And getting Marquise Brown for $7, that's just a steal. So I'm super excited about that. He's going to be a guy that I probably have quite a bit, and I really do like that. As you can see, I really do like the team I have right here. I obviously spent a ton of money to get Jalen Hurts, but I don't really feel like it made me miss out on anybody. Obviously, there are the wide receivers that went earlier that I do like, guys like Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra, but if I were to get those guys instead of Jalen Hurts, I'd feel like I'm missing out on a huge positional advantage. And the difference to me between Chris Olave or Marquise Brown and those guys, like it's there. There's a very real difference, but it's a lot smaller than what the difference is going to be between Jalen Hurts and a guy like Dak Prescott or one of those low end quarterback ones. So to me, it's very much worth drafting that top end quarterback. I'll do some other drafts as the off season goes on where I do some different builds. I'll probably show you guys what a Kelsey build would look like, and I can show you guys what it would look like if you wait on quarterback and spend $1 on the position, and maybe what it looks like if you spend something in the middle there as well. But it's definitely just a position that I find myself really valuing. It's also generally one of the harder positions to address and get elite production during the course of the season. You're not going to find a top 3 quarterback on the waiver wire, as to where there will be spike week producers at the running back and tight end position that you can find on waivers pretty often, especially backup running backs and stuff. So it's generally a position that I just don't really want to be going into the season without. So we've got $64 left. That means our max bid's 55. That's pretty good. Like I said, I want to leave, you know, about $1 for my bench players, which I guess if you look at it like that, I kind of left too much money, which I guess is something that I should really note is that maybe I could have overspent and gotten another running back, or maybe I could have just already spent up and gotten Mark Andrews or something and gotten the top tier tight end. Maybe I do have that extra cap space, but um, I'm gonna go through some money here pretty quick. I think I often do. Um, in fact, it really does look like I left too much money on the board here. I think that this means that I should actually make a point of getting a couple more guys on my bench that I really do like. So even though I don't really need that 4th running back, I'm probably going to spend up and get Miles Sanders because I have the money for that. That's something that you should do. Um, the worst thing you can do is get to the end of your draft and just find yourself drastically overpaying for players. It's better to realize you have too much money and then just secure that depth, because having depth isn't going to hurt you, and maybe you'll find yourself during the course of a season being able to trade one of these guys for players that you can really help boost your team. So I'm glad I caught that because I think I did screw up. So I'll really look at that and see, okay, I have $64 right now. I should probably have something closer to like 30. So that means I could have spent like an extra $30 on a player that I maybe would have loved. So maybe instead of Marquise Brown, I could have gotten myself a T. Higgins, a Devonta Smith to go with my Jalen Hurts, something like that. It's just worth noting just because that That's why we do these mock drafts, especially with salary cap drafts, is because there's just a huge there's a real skill difference, something that you don't really see so much in standard snake drafts, where being good at salary cap drafts is really going to help you quite a bit when it comes to making your teams better. And it's not necessarily something that's super easy to do. And I think that you really should just make a point of getting good at practicing these, because a lot of your league mates will maybe do one mock draft and they won't know how these things play out and how to address certain different situations. So they'll find themselves with way too much money at the end, or they'll find themselves having spent all their money on 3 players, and then they won't be able to touch anything in the draft for the whole rest of the draft. So it's really important to find that balance and know when it's okay to be aggressive, and then know when maybe you need to back off a little bit and let yourself recoup some money. So um, honestly, I'm not too upset with this team though, because I like all the players I have. I feel like every single one I've gotten at a value, but I think that because I know what these values are, I should probably be trying to take greater advantage of the values that we're seeing, and then knowing, well, okay, I am confident in these players, the values I'm getting, so then how can I take the money that I'm saving by getting these players and turn that into a positional advantage somewhere else? So, like, what it's looking like here is maybe I should have paid up for Mark Andrews. That's sort of what I'm looking at, is that I could have gotten the tight end 2 as well as my quarterback 1, and still had plenty of money left over to get myself wide receiver 1, a couple wide receiver 2s, and 3 top 15 running backs. So I think that's more of how I'm leaning this. Or I could have maybe sacrificed a little bit at a different position. Maybe I could have sacrificed myself not getting one of these running backs and really gotten a top tier running back or another top tier wide receiver. But yep, so I've got the $57 left, so I'm just going to get Miles Sanders. I really like him. I think he's going to be the clear workhorse for the Panthers. He's got that contract. They spent a lot of money on him. They said they want to get him 50 receptions. I think I even projected him for a little bit more than that. And he's just going to be a really great player. I love him in fantasy this season. I don't see any reason for him to be any less than what he was last season. He's going to be a top 15 running back as well, probably. So by my rankings, I do have 4 top 15 running backs right now. I've got 3 top 15 or 3 top 20 wide receivers, and I've got the quarterback 1. So I'm really happy with how this team's turning out so far. I still have $46. I think that Jerry Jeudy's a guy that has a lot of upside. I think I might want to swing for the fences here. We're getting to the point where I have the money. I should just spend it, because I don't want to find myself at the end of the draft not filling my team with the best players possible. So Jerry Jeudy's going to come on my roster, and then I'm going to try and get Brandon Ayuk, and I'm going to feel really good about my wide receiver room. I'll have 5 receivers that I'm really happy about. I'm going to get Dallas Goedert, because I think that Dallas Goedert's going to be my tight end 3 so far on the season. I think there's even a chance that he creeps into that tight end 2. I think he's just as good as Mark Andrews, and I think there's going to be a lot more competition for targets in Baltimore than what we've seen previously. I still think Mark Andrews is the tight end 2, but Dallas Goedert's a really good player on a really good offense, and I absolutely love the value that you're getting here. So, wow, this team's actually turning out really well. It's got a little bit more depth than I would generally recommend, because I think that I could have waited, or I could have been a little bit more aggressive early on, maybe gotten one more top tier running back, and then had missed out on like 2 of these guys. But really love the starting lineup here. I've got a top 3 tight end, a number 1 quarterback, 3 top 15 running backs, and a couple of receivers that I'm really high on. So really do love this team here so far. We've got plenty of money to get whatever guys we want. Kyle Pitts, he's a guy I'm pretty much out on this season. The numbers just don't add up when you do the projections. He's going to have a really high target share on an offense that's just going to suck really bad and not pass the ball very much. So it's going to be really hard for him to be a very valuable fantasy asset. He's going to have to be extremely efficient, and he could be that, but I think that, like you see, ESPN's got him projected for 800 yards and 4 touchdowns. I have him projected for less than both of those numbers. It's just going to be hard because the Falcons aren't going to throw many touchdowns. They're not going to throw for very many yards. Drake London's probably the number 1 target in that offense. So Kyle Pitts is the guy that I'm pretty much out on, despite how much I think he's a really great talent. Mike Williams is the guy I like, sort of. It's just a tough ride with Mike Williams. He's a really talented player when he can stay healthy, but it's hard to find myself drafting too much of him, because you never know when you can play him. And I just don't think it's a very safe bet to take, especially where I don't feel like I need any more upside at the wide receiver position, because I've got guys that I'm super high on already. And I'm going to be drafting a guy that I think is super safe in Brandon Ayuk here. But I've got plenty of money left, so I'm at the running back position. Which other guys do I like? I'm pretty high on Antonio Gibson. I've been high on Antonio Gibson before. I He's bit me in the butt before, but for $1, it's like that means he's free because you can't have to spend at least $1 on everybody. So I find myself probably getting Antonio Gibson more often than I want to this offseason just because I think he's a good enough player. That offense is going to be better with Eric Bieniemy at offensive coordinator. So there's certainly a world that exists where Antonio Gibson's better than he's been in the past, and he's been a running back 1, 2, or 3 years. So Gibson's probably a guy that I'm going to get quite a bit of. At the wide receiver position, there's a couple more guys I like. Obviously, I've been touching on Brandon Ayuk quite a bit. I'm pretty high on Treylon Burks this season. He's going to be the number one wide receiver on Tennessee. I know that's not worth a ton because it's Tennessee, but it's worth something. He's a really good player. I like him quite a bit from a talent perspective. He's a guy that I find myself getting quite a bit of. And then Jordan Addison's a guy I'm in love with as well. I've got him listed as one of the best values in the draft. Says he's $1. So you can get him for $1. That's just robbery. He won't be $1 when it comes down to it. But any of these dollar players that have value, they're guys that certainly are worth touching. That's the other thing I'll note is that when you find yourself in an auction draft, there's obviously a lot of guys that go for $1 and $0, but there's a really clear difference between how good some of these $1 guys are. So I find that it does often make a lot of sense to save up to $3 for each of your bench spots because that allows you to nominate a player and then bid on the player after you get outbid. That just sets you up to get the bench guys that you want, and the difference between spending $1 and $3 on a player is not a whole lot, and it's not really going to hurt your starting lineup too much, but it is going to help from getting the bench players that you want. I know I said earlier that go take a look. The bench players that you draft are not going to be on your team at the end of the season. I do stand by that statement, but I think that there's something to be said for making sure that you do get the bench players you want when you're only spending $1 to $3 on them anyway. Javonte Williams, the tough player to project right now. I think that he's going to be really good when he gets healthy, but I just don't know when that's going to be. I think this Broncos offense is going to be a lot better than it was last season, but I just don't find myself drafting much Javonte. For $4, it's hard to say no because the upside's certainly there. He's really talented, but I just don't see myself doing it. I'm going to nominate Jordan Addison. I've got him as my wide receiver 25, so getting a top 25 receiver at this point in the draft to me is just an absolute steal. I love Addison, the player. He's going to be on a really good offense, and I'm really going to get him for $1. It looks like this is something that I wouldn't expect to see happen in a draft that's full of non-CPUs because once you get into real drafts, people that have money left, they're not just going to look at that ADP of that pre-draft value of $1 and allow that to slide. They will be happy to bid $2, $3 on them. So be ready to spend a couple extra dollars on guys towards the end of drafts, especially as you have people that have money and won't spend it. For example, Team 12 here has $42 left. Plenty of money to build out their team. They could have bid me up if they wanted to. I'm surprised they didn't. And they probably would have if this were a real draft. So just keep that in mind. You're not going to find yourself in a position where people at the end of drafts are just going to let these guys go. There will be situations where a guy like this, who has $42 and only 3 spots to fill, 4 spots to fill, might spend $10 on a $1 player because why not? They might as well get the guy they want. And I do recommend you do that as well. I'd do your best to mock draft as much as you can. Don't let yourself get into a spot where you have too much money like that. But if you do, just overpay and get the guy that you want because you can't take the money with you, so you might as well just take it, spend it all, get the guy that you want, and move on. So just keep that in mind. Do your best to leave your draft with $0. Obviously, you could spend $25 on a kicker at the very end so you feel better about yourself. I've certainly done that as well, but do your best to just make sure that as you get closer and closer to filling out your team, you are closer and closer to $0. Make sure that you get as much value out of everything as you can, and just sort of live with the results from there. So looking at this, we got 2 more bench spots, kicker and a defense. I will likely be trying to get 1 more receiver and 1 more running back. There's no reason for me to draft a quarterback or a tight end. I've got a quarterback and tight end that I'm super high on. If either of them bust, I'm going to be sad. I'm at the point with the tight ends where I'll just be waiver wire surfing if Goddard gets hurt. And at the quarterback position, there's just not enough that's worth me reaching on a guy. No reason for me to draft a quarterback there. There'll be plenty on waivers if something were to happen to Jalen Hurts. So if you spend up on a player like that, you might as well just make sure your running backs and wide receivers are as good as possible. I'm not in on Michael Thomas this season or probably ever again. He hasn't played meaningful football in like 3 or 4 years, and I don't see myself touching him very much. So looking at the running backs, let's see, I'll get one of these guys. It's probably Antonio Gibson. He's probably the guy that I have ranked the highest. I do like Samaje Perine. He's going to be a guy that I think will be quite useful, especially as Javonte Williams works to get healthy. So early on in the season, I think Samaje Perine is going to be useful, but I'm really looking for a guy with upside here. I don't need a guy that I can just start early on in the season because I got plenty of depth here. So Perine doesn't really help me there. I think that Antonio Gibson does have a little bit of upside, especially if something were to happen to Brian Robinson or if he just really takes over that lead role like he should because he's their most talented player. And then at wide receiver, looking at these players left, I do like Jahan Dotson quite a bit, but I just don't see a world where this Washington offense is good enough to support two wide receivers. In all likelihood, he's the number 2 wide receiver on this offense, so I just can't buy into the hype that he's been getting this offseason. A lot of people love him. I love the talent, but I just can't do it. So, looking at these guys, I'm probably going to swing for the fences and take Treylon Burks. There is a world that exists. I'm not going to compare him to A.J. Brown. Obviously, he gets that comp because he's effectively replacing A.J. Brown in Tennessee, but they're similar enough players. He's going to be used in that role, and I think he's good enough to be a 1,000-yard receiver if given the opportunity. And if he could maybe spike touchdown performances somehow, he's a big body. He could have a 5-6 touchdown season rather than, like, I think I got him projected for like 3 or 4. So there's an opportunity for Treylon Burks to really surprise us this season, and he's young enough and trending up that he's the kind of guy that I like to get towards the end of my draft. So I think I'll be for sure grabbing Treylon Burks and Antonio Gibson at the end of this draft. There's really no reason for me to look anywhere else. I've got the money to get them. I'm just going to make sure I get them, and then I'm going to leave this draft probably with like $20 extra and be a little sad. But that's okay. And then, yeah, when you get towards that point, you might as well draft the best defenses you can get. It's so early in the offseason that I have not done a deep dive on looking at opening season schedules to see which defenses are worth drafting, but so I won't even give a suggestion there, and there's no reason for me to give a suggestion kicker either because kickers are worthless, and you should probably just not have them in your leagues. But hopefully this will speed up here, and we can just get to our last 2 guys, and then we'll call it good. So, yeah, I think that this is a pretty good team. I think I'd give myself like a B on this. Really love my quarterback. I have only players that I love, which is great. I love that about auction drafts, but I do find that sometimes in an auction draft I focus just a little bit too much on getting the values of the guys that I love, and I just don't take an opportunity to make sure that I actually spend all my money. So this is a good reminder that I can be a little more aggressive. There's plenty of values that I like, and maybe I should have just went out and got one more top 10 consensus running back or one more top 15 consensus wide receiver and just sort of ignored the fact that maybe I don't have them as a great value, but just felt that I'm confident enough in the values that I have that I can sort of I don't even need to worry so much about getting a value on every single player because I've got that money to spare, and this was a good reminder of that. So it was super helpful. You'll see as well, I've got now 5 wide receivers on my bench that I truly love. I think all 5 of these guys are guys that can be top 30 wide receivers this season, and then I've got 2 in my starting lineup that I think are going to be top 15 guys. So this is I'm actually really happy with this team. I think I've got a ton of depth. I've got some star power at wide receiver with Olave. Definitely a real star at running back with Nick Chubb. I think he's just always underrated. And then Jalen Hurts is going to be an absolute monster again this season. So I really like this team. I just think I left a little bit of meat on the bone. I'm going to leave this draft probably with $18, and that feels a little bad. But I really like this team. I hope this helped with you guys. If there's anything that you guys liked about what I did, if you had any questions, let me know. If you have any mock drafts you want me to grade your teams or whatever, let me know, and we can have some fun with that. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and if you made it this far, you at least liked something about it, so please do give me a like on the video. You can subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and I'll catch you next time.